This is Land of Havilah coming back at you with the book Haggai. It's a very short book toward the end of the Old Testament. It'll take about 7 minutes to read the entire thing, but we'll break it up with comments as usual so that our entire recording will be about 20 minutes. We're reading from the World English Bible as usual. Our name, Land of Havilah, comes from Genesis 2:11. It's a place that has everything a person could want, just like the kingdom of God has everything a person could want. Before we start reading Haggai, let's give some background. The man Haggai was a Jewish prophet. Apparently he was born a captive and slave in the Babylonian kingdom. When Persian King Cyrus took over the kingdom, he issued a decree that all the Jewish captives could return to Judea. A group of about 50,000 Jews took him up on it. They were led by Zerubbabel, a descendant of the royal line of David, and Jeshua, a priest. Haggai calls Jeshua Joshua. It seems that Haggai was in that group of 50,000 that returned to Judea. The same goes for Zechariah, who prophesied alongside him. The book Ezra gives Haggai and Zechariah credit for helping rebuild the temple because they encouraged Israel with Yahweh's word on the subject, Ezra 5:1. Problem was that the Jews had started rebuilding the temple, but they quit in the middle of it. Yahweh put them back to work through Haggai and Zechariah's word. Persian King Cyrus, when he took over, issued the original decree to build the temple, but he passed away about 7 years later before the temple was complete. After 8 more years and 2 more kings, Darius the Great took the throne. In the meantime, back in Jerusalem, temple construction had come to a halt. Going now to the text of the book, we'll read the first 11 verses, then explain. Haggai chapter 1, verse 1. In the 2nd year of Darius the king, in the 6th month, in the 1st day of the month, Yahweh's word came by Haggai the prophet to Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua the son of Jehozadak the high priest, saying, This is what Yahweh of armies says. These people say the time hasn't yet come, the time for Yahweh's house to be built. Then Yahweh's word came by Haggai the prophet, saying, Is it a time for you yourselves to dwell in your paneled houses while this house lies waste? Now therefore this is what Yahweh of armies says, Consider your ways. You have sown much and bring in little. You eat, but you don't have enough. You drink, but you aren't filled with drink. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm. And he who earns wages to put them into a bag with holes in it. This is what Yahweh of armies says, Consider your ways. Go up to the mountain, bring wood, and build the house. I will take pleasure in it, and I will be glorified, says Yahweh. You looked for much, and behold, it came to little. And when you brought it home, I blew it away. Why, says Yahweh of armies? Because of my house that lies waste, while each of you is busy with his own house. Therefore, for your sake, the heavens withhold the dew, and the earth withholds its fruit. I called for a drought on the land, on the mountains, on the grain, on the new wine, on the oil, on that which the ground produces, on men, on livestock, and on all the labor of the hands. Comment in verse 1, Darius is king. He ruled the vast Achaemenid Empire at its peak, one of the greatest empires in history. It included the entire Middle East, parts of Europe and Africa, and in the other direction to what is now Pakistan. Judea was only a small fraction of Darius's domain, barely a blip on his radar screen. In verse 1, it's Darius's 2nd year, and it's the 1st day of the 6th month on the Hebrew calendar, which for us converts to August the 29th, 520 BC, according to the NET Bible translation notes. The word of the Lord came to Haggai the prophet on that day. And verse 1 says, Yahweh directed the word at Zerubbabel, the governor of Judea, and Joshua the high priest. Temple construction was at a standstill because in verse 2 the people were saying the time isn't right. Let's put it off for some other time. Just before this, construction was going well until some government officials in nearby Samaria started pressuring the Jews not to build. They implied Darius wouldn't be happy about it, Ezra chapter 5. They wrote a letter to Darius informing him that construction was underway and asking him whether he approved. So under this kind of threat, the Jews stopped, at least until Darius could send back a reply. In those days, it took months to get a letter to Darius, maybe months more for Darius to respond. Depending on how Darius felt about it, he might order the Jewish leaders to be killed for building the temple, so there was no construction while they waited. So it's no wonder in verse 2 that the Jews said the time isn't right, maybe later. They were too ashamed to come right out and say, we're scared out of our minds. They only said to each other, let's take a little break here. Not mentioning the real problem was a lack of courage or lack of commitment. They had Cyrus's authorization for it 15 years earlier, but they didn't know how Darius would feel about it. In verses 3 and 4, as Yahweh pointed out, the Jews had turned their attention from building Yahweh's house to building wood-paneled houses for themselves. Bare stone walls were more the norm. Paneling was fit for a king's palace, 1 Kings 6:9. They were going all out on their own houses, but ignoring Yahweh's house. To be fair, they were under threat, but that was no excuse. What important thing ever gets done if fear gets in the way? In verses 5 to 11, Yahweh basically says, do you wonder why your personal matters have been going so poorly? Why your crops have been so bad? Why you don't have any money? Why you can't afford decent clothes? It's because you're holding back on me. Therefore, I'm holding back on you. In verse 11, Yahweh says, I sent drought on the land, therefore your agricultural production is poor. So the gist of the message is, how about you try taking care of my business and I'll take care of yours? This was all according to Yahweh's covenant with Israel, that he would prosper them as a nation if they would serve him faithfully. Leviticus chapter 26, there would be plenty of good rain, good crops, and so forth. Not that everyone would prosper. He said there would always be poor people, Deuteronomy 15:11. But he would give Israel general prosperity if they would give him general obedience. So with this message of take care of me and I'll take care of you, did the governor, the high priest, and the rest of the people pay attention? Verse 12. Then Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Joshua the son of Jehozadak the high priest, with all the remnant of the people, obeyed Yahweh their God's voice and the words of Haggai the prophet, as Yahweh their God had sent him, and the people feared Yahweh. Comment in verse 12, the remnant of the people are the Israelites who've returned to the homeland. They listened to Haggai in verse 12 because Yahweh had sent him, and they feared Yahweh. Verse 13. Then Haggai, Yahweh's messenger, spoke Yahweh's message to the people, saying, I am with you, says Yahweh. Yahweh stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and the spirit of all the remnant of the people, and they came and worked on the house of Yahweh of armies, their God, in the 24th day of the month, in the 6th month, in the 2nd year of Darius the king. Comment in verse 13, after the people had listened in verse 12, Yahweh said, I am with you, end quote. Now that he's with them, they'll prosper personally, and they'll prosper in what they do for him. Jesus said, apart from me, you can do nothing, John 15:5, so we must have him with us. Not that Yahweh promises Christians monetary prosperity, but if he's with us on something, it will happen. In verse 14, Yahweh stirred up Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the rest of the people to get back to work, even under threat. In verse 15, they commenced work on the 24th day of the month, which was 23 days after the word of the Lord came to Haggai. It's been about 15 years since they started building the temple, Ezra 3:8, and it turns out they'll be done in about 4 more years, Ezra 6:15. Haggai 2 is next.